So, welcome to the next edition of the Rare Business Podcast. With me today, I have Huggy Rao. Hi, Huggy.
Hello, Andrew. Pleasure.
So, Huggy, for the
I'm sorry, Adrian.
There you go. Huggy, for the benefit of our listeners and readers, can you tell us a bit about you and a bit about the work that you do?
Great. I'm a person who impersonates a professor at the Graduate School of Business at Stanford University. And when I say impersonates, I, of course, mean that I have a great job description. And the job description actually is to be me.
Ah.
That was the way the job was described to me. And I thought, my God, what a freeing job description. So what that means is I pretty much spend time solving puzzles and problems that I want to and teach courses that I am actually very excited by. So that's really my job. My job, in short, is to be me.
Fantastic. That sounds like what a great job description.
It is. I feel very, very privileged, Adrian.
Excellent. But Huggy, the reason for us coming together today is that you've just, with your co-author, Robert Sutton, you've just written a new book called Scaling Up Excellence, Getting to More Without Settling for Less. Now, and I have the book with me, but what I wanted to ask you was, can you tell us a little bit about the book and how it came about and what's its purpose?
Great questions again, Adrian. So the book actually originated in 2006. So Bob's in the School of Engineering and I'm in the School of Business at Stanford University.
Okay.
We co-direct a program called Customer Focused Innovation.
Nice, I like it.
And what we do is we get executives from all over the world, and in the morning we give them what can be called theory, if you will. And in the afternoon, we give them a hard problem to solve.
Right.
So our model is, our approach rather is clean models and dirty hands. Clean models in the morning and dirty hands in the afternoon. And what we emphasize there is, for example, in the morning we might teach you something about, well, how do you organize for innovation? But in the afternoon, what we get people to focus on, and this is what we did last year, for example, was to solve a problem of improving customer experience for JetBlue. So as I was mentioning, what we do in the customer-focused innovation program is clean models in the morning and dirty hands in the afternoon. So to give you a sense of what the Dirty Hands project was we sent participants to San Francisco Airport and we said, observe customers and figure out how to improve the customer experience.
Right.
And so every afternoon they had to do that. And on Thursday, they actually had to present to the chairman of JetBlue without using a PowerPoint. That meant that they had to actually act out their idea.
Wow.
So to give you a taste of the idea, one group of people, for instance, observed a couple of elderly customers who were thoroughly disoriented by the scale of San Francisco Airport.
Okay.
So what do? Now, we had told them we only have one constraint, and the constraint is you can't spend money.
Okay.
So, the easiest solution, of course, is to say, great, JetBlue ought to hire a bunch of concierges to take care of the elderly customers. That's a no-brainer. You don't need anybody to display creativity. But because we told them they couldn't spend any money, they came up with a very interesting idea. And they said, maybe there are a bunch of JetBlue customers who actually are very interested in serving as escorts and guides for the elderly customers.
Right.
And what do you give them? Remember, you can't give them freebies, no free miles, no upgrades, nothing. But instead, what this group realized was what would motivate these escorts, these guides to the elderly consumers was the right to board the plane at the same time as the elderly consumer.
Ah, nice.
So that doesn't cost JetBlue much, as you can well imagine.
Sure.
And what's important was they did it cleverly because they took care of a problem of the elderly customer, but they improved the flying experience too for a subset of passengers who could not only board, but feel they'd helped somebody.
Yeah.
And when they presented it to the chairman of JetBlue, the chairman actually said, my God, I wish we thought about it. And the participants came to Bob and I and said, we love this. How do we scale it?
Right.
And Bob gave an answer, and I gave an answer, and Adrian, we were thoroughly disappointed with our answers. We just thought they sucked. And then we said, my God, if we don't know how to scale it, this is something we've got to figure out how to do.
Yeah.
And what do professors then do if they don't know they don't know an answer to something? Well, you begin research.
Uh-huh.
The other thing you do is you teach a course.
Yeah, okay.
Because that's when you're most motivated to offer a course.
Yeah.
You're most motivated to offer a course, and the students know how excited you are. So we got the first year, 2007, Bob and I got 60 students from across Stanford, and we gave them a difficult problem. And the problem was we assigned dormitories to them randomly after putting the students into teams, and we told them improve the usage of helmets by bicyclists on the Stanford campus.
Okay.
How do you do that to young people who think they're immortal?
Fair point.
And so we learned a lot from that. The next year, we did a project with the US Army. And there, the problem was how do you capture the insights of soldiers from the forward operating bases in Afghanistan and actually help soldiers who actually rotate in and take their position. So our students worked on things like this, and that's kind of when we realized, this is a complex problem. It's a very important problem. And we interviewed hundreds of executives, and what became clear, Adrian, was executives are very confident about their decision-making skills.
Yes.
But they're actually very, very apprehensive about their scaling skills.
Yes.
See, they can deal with the question of how do I make myself better?
Yeah.
But how do I make a unit larger than me better was a problem. And that's when the idea of a book was born.
So is it the helping other people get better? I mean, is that the core key scaling challenge that big organizations face, or are there more challenges than that?
The basic challenge every organization faces, be it small or large, for-profit or non-profit, is you have pockets of goodness in one part of the organization. How do you spread it throughout the organization without voltage loss? That's the problem.
Okay. And what have you, through your research and you've got lots of case studies in the book and stories and things, but can you give me a sort of an idea of how some of these firms have overcome some of these challenges? I mean, it sounds like you've got to identify the people or the talent or the motivators or the advocates or whatever you call them. But how do you scale that initiative, as it were?
That's right. So the reason why organizations fail to scale excellence is, one reason is they think of scaling as a footprint problem. How many consumers, how many employees, how many offices, how many markets, and things of that nature.
Yeah.
What we find is the most effective organizations realize it's not the footprint, but the mindset that matters.
Ah, okay.
And when you think of the mindset for us, it's simply knowing very clearly what's sacred and what's taboo.
Right.
If people are confused about that and you lose sight of that, you're in trouble.
Does that mean when you say what's sacred and what's taboo, is that almost like identifying what are the rules, as it were?
The norms.
Okay, the norms. Okay.
Yeah, because the rules may be unwritten most of the time.
Yes. Okay. But also in the book, when you're developing all of this, you also start to identify like a roadmap for establishing and stimulating the excellence in organizations. Can you tell me a little bit about sort of that and what the sort of various steps are as part of the roadmap?
Absolutely. The first thing we begin with is we say, what is excellence?
Okay.
And for us, excellence means people do the right thing even when nobody's watching over their shoulder.
Right.
Because the moment you need people to watch over somebody else's shoulder, That's not excellence, or at least that's not sustainable.
No.
For every 10 people you hire 3 managers. So there's no way you can sustain excellence.
Sure.
You're going to become slow, you're going to become bureaucratic, and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to really sort of keep that in mind. And what we say is the real key to creating that sense of excellence is to scale accountability. And when we think of accountability, our view is accountability doesn't simply mean you feel like you own the place,
Right.
but you also feel like the place owns you. So you need the push of commitment and the tug of obligation.
And does that all tie into the whole employee engagement space as well?
Absolutely. And there, what we suggest, Adrian, is decision makers who do poorly at scaling, they only see it as an air war and they don't think about it as a ground war.
So no hearts and minds then.
Or you're not even thinking of people on the front line.
Right.
So you're thinking in a very abstract way. You think, oh, if I can explain the logic of the change,
yes.
If you can go on a road show with the same PowerPoint presentation to 50 different locations, once I've explained, everything will work. Mm-hmm. But what the troops want is they actually aren't interested in the air war. They're actually interested in the ground war. They're asking themselves, how are you providing me tools to excel at my job?
Sure.
How are you making what I do easier and quicker for me?
Sure.
And if you don't think at that level, you can actually make a lot of mistakes. Let me give you one example.
Okay.
In one company that acquired another company, the acquiring company's CEO, after the acquisition got approved by the regulatory authorities, explained the logic of the merger to engineers.
Right.
I was watching what would the engineers ask this person. The engineers looked at the CEO and said, we use iPhones, you guys use BlackBerries. Does it mean we should give up our iPhones and use BlackBerry instead?
Yeah.
And the CEO didn't have an answer. What does that tell the person on the front line?
Well, absolutely. I mean, it reminds me of this idea is that when people talk about customers and stuff, if they've never actually stood in a customer's shoes and experienced it from a customer's perspective, then the perspective difference can be quantum.
Absolutely.
Because it's otherwise it's just like you're talking one group is talking in theory and another group is actually talking in practice.
Exactly. The problem, I think, is when you scale and if you're at the apex of the organization and you're a leader, it's not like you've climbed Everest.
Right.
But as we know, Adrian, when you climb Everest, what you lack is oxygen.
Yeah.
So at the top of organizations, you lack the oxygen of candor and customer insight.
Yeah.
And when you lack that oxygen, you make bad decisions. You think it's only an air war.
Yes.
And then you can't actually sustain the ground war.
Which is interesting because actually, as you say, as executives ascend, in a hierarchy, they might their, if you like, incentives or their targets are aligned to, as you would say, air war sort of metrics, which it might be, overall profitability, ROI, share price movement, all those sort of things. But that means absolutely nothing to the person that's on the front line.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
That is exactly right. And so we say that if you really want to scale excellence, that's where you've got to begin. But the most important thing we argue in the book, there are a number of principles, but the one that I thought I'd emphasize here, maybe there are two worth special emphasis. The first is you have to cut cognitive load.
Right.
So what we mean by that is our working memory has a limit. We can have 7 items in our working memory. Mm-hmm. And if we go beyond 7 items, what happens is there are so many demands on our brain power, our willpower then gets eroded. So here's a lovely experiment. One of my colleagues assigned people randomly to 2 conditions. One group, he says, please remember a 2-digit number. The other group, he says, please remember a 7-digit number. And then he opens the door and lets them into a lobby. And in the lobby, on one side are tables laden with chocolate desserts, and on the other is a table laden with fruit.
Uh-huh.
And he's watching who gobbles the chocolate. Who do you think gobbles the chocolate first?
The people that trying to remember 7 different things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You're very right. And the reason is you see chocolate as a temptation, you know it's a temptation, but you can't resist the temptation. The
Right.
reason is you're too busy remembering the 7 digits.
Okay.
Where-
Okay.
Whereas
Yeah.
people with the 2 digits, they also recognize that chocolate is a temptation, but they're able to resist it because they're not as much distracted by the task of remembering 2 digits. So you see the problem. We
Yeah.
think power is in the heart and brain power is in the head, but both are very deeply connected.
Excellent. So, can you give us a couple of examples of, say, firms that you've, through your research, you found that do scale excellence really well, and and the things that they do differently, and the sort of the behaviours they exhibit to help them scale and also expand the reach of excellence, I guess.
Absolutely. So, a great example, given our discussion on cognitive load, is Amazon.
Okay.
So, one of the things, if you really summarize all the literature on team size, the research says that 5 is the best size for a core team.
Right.
Any more than 5, your load increases. You have to take into account other people and what they're doing and so forth, right?
Do you think? Sorry to interrupt. Do you think that's related to? I mean, I know that you have an interest in sociology. Is that related to our sociological kind of origins and sort of family units and things like that?
Absolutely. In fact, it is certainly related to the size of the most primitive social unit that we're familiar with.
Right.
And I'll just talk about that in just a minute
Okay.
as well. But when we think about team size, the striking thing is 5 people, you actually have the right amount of load. How does Amazon do this? They don't actually have a manual, or you don't need to go through 10 approvals to make sure you have a team size of 5. How do they do that? They have a lovely rule called the 2 pizza rule. So
Okay.
what's the 2 pizza rule? When you put together a team, you just need to order 2 large pizzas, because 2 large pizzas are enough to feed 5 people comfortably.
Okay.
And if you need to order more than 2 pizzas for your team, you instantly know your team is too big and therefore not good.
Right.
How simple is that?
That's brilliant.
And you don't even need to remember it. But when you're ordering it, it's like a flashlight, and you say, oh my God, I got to get 5 pizzas. It's too big a team.
Yeah. I like it. I love little simple analogies like that, because it just cuts through, excuse my language, it cuts through all the crap.
Exactly. I love your phrase, Adrian. And one of the things that excellent organizations do is they don't actually focus on the cream of the crap.
Yes.
Instead, they're actually thinking of the cream of the crop.
Yes.
And how to actually improve all of that. So cutting load is like one of the big things. The other thing we suggest that organizations ought to do is that the journey to excellence is from bad to great.
Right.
And the reason is bad means, of course, bad is way stronger than good.
Really? Sorry? No. Explain.
So, imagine a married couple.
Yes.
If you say one bad thing to your partner, you have to say a minimum of 5 good things at least to even things out.
Right.
So bad things are way more memorable, way more stronger than good things. So if you're a manager and all that you do is you say, I got to put good in the system.
Yeah.
Well, the good's never going to become great because people look at the bad. And what they conclude when they look at the bad is that nobody cares.
Yeah.
So here's a lovely example. Imagine you're the CEO of Haier, the Chinese refrigerator company.
Uh-huh.
You're making lousy refrigerators.
Right.
What would most organizations do? You say, well, what we need actually Six Sigma quality initiatives. We need to hire black belts and brown belts and blue belts and red belts, and you have it. But what the CEO realized is he said, look, we have an even deeper problem because the workers making the refrigerators in China, their bathrooms are lousy. They're unclean.
Yeah.
They're fetid. They smell badly, all of this. But what do the bathrooms tell the workers? Nobody cares.
Right.
So if nobody cares about the worker, why should the worker then care about the customer?
Too true. Too true.
So what this guy said is, if I really need to improve quality, I've got to take the bad out. And the way to do it is to actually fix the bathrooms first. Then they'll actually think about taking care of the customer.
I think that's absolutely right, and it's also there's another sort of almost a similar example where it's if you think about the view from I guess the employee is like a customer of the organization in many
Exactly.
in many respects, but it's the same sort of thing as if you're a customer. Say you go into a restaurant and the service is great and the food is great and the decor and the ambience is great. And you're really enjoying yourself, and then you excuse yourself and go to the bathroom, and the bathrooms are a mess.
Exactly.
What do you think?
That's exactly right.
So it's almost like you can't get away with just wallpaper, and wallpaper doesn't build a great house.
Right. Or put another way, window dressings don't matter much.
No.
They're not the pathway to scaling up excellence. And I think, one of the things we sort of talk about a lot is when you want to scale excellence, remember, don't just think about your star employees. Think about the Sherpas too.
Right. No, that makes complete sense.
Yeah, who gets you to Everest? It's the Sherpas.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you forget about them.
Well, that's absolutely right. And that sort of brings me on to this idea. I mean, I was having a conversation with a gentleman who's CEO, a gentleman by the name of Mark Lancaster.
Uh-huh.
He's the CEO of SDL, and they are a customer experience software firm, and they operate with some of over 40 of the world's 50 largest brands. And he said an interesting thing in the interview, and he turned around and said, when an executive team in a large organization decides to do something, and when it actually gets done, can take up to 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Now, do you think that what we discuss in the book and the roadmap could probably help with that?
Absolutely. In a lot of organizations, the larger the organization, obviously, the more time it takes. But even in large organizations, some things actually take root very fast.
Yeah.
So, to give you an example, at Twitter, the chief engineer, when all the engineers get together, one of the things he kind of realized was, wait a minute, he wanted to get rid of bad behavior, so he began to collect cell phones before a meeting.
Right.
Because what everybody was doing was they were looking at their cell phones, nobody was listening to each other.
Uh-huh.
Now, Twitter is an organization with 1,000 people, but what was amazing was when the chief engineer did it, very quickly other people began to say, hey, that's a good way to actually run a meeting. Very quickly that thing spread, for example.
Yeah.
So, but other things might take a little time, and it all depends on the scale of what you're trying to do. We just finished a case study on this amazing woman, Shannon May, and her husband Jay. They have a very modest goal, and that's to change the lives of 10 million school kids in Africa. And they're creating schools, by the way.
Wow.
Actually establishing schools which are for-profit schools.
Okay.
And they've created 250 of these schools. Now, as they're scaling, they're a year and a half into it, but obviously that kind of change takes time, but the results have been impressive. Kids in their schools, they actually outperform kids in competing schools by 200%. And if you look at some of their changes, their principal changes are, how do we make the life of a teacher easier? So what they've done is they've told the teacher, you don't need to worry about figuring out what lesson plan to use. We've got that worked out. Here's a Nook-like device or a Kindle-like device. It'll tell you exactly what to do at 10:20.
And then you let the teacher focus on doing the bit that's in front of the class, which is helping people learn.
That's right. So the only thing I would say in response to Mark Lancaster's remark is you have to do it way quicker than 2 years if you're in the business of removing bad behavior from organizations.
Sure.
You can't afford to wait for 2 years to take the bad out.
Yeah.
You got to do it super quick because otherwise your organization wouldn't be around in the first place.
I think also I would suggest that it's, whilst organizations are complex, you've got to work really, really hard to figure out what the levers are as well.
That's right.
And then focus your effort on one or two things rather than a whole host of things.
That is exactly right. And you have to start with the simplest of things. Let me give you one example, perhaps in closing. And this was actually a group, I was actually with a group of bankers from Europe. And I was asking them, hey, if I applied for a €400,000 mortgage loan, how long would you take to process it? And I asked them this question right after they visited a Toyota plant nearby here, where they make a truck in 6 or 7 hours.
Yeah.
And the guys look at me and say, we'll take 30 days. I said, why? Because you need 28 signatures. And I said, why? And they said, because nobody wants to make a decision. And I said, wait a minute. If I'm person number one and I get the application and I know 29 other people are going to sign, am I going to read through what I'm going to sign? Probably not. Mm-hmm. Now imagine at the other end, I'm person 30 and I see 29 signatures. Am I going to read? I probably won't read. I'll put my signature there. And I was kind of asking these bankers, I said, has anybody read the application? You've got 30 signatures, you've taken 30 days, and there lies the problem.
Sure. That's brilliant. So, Huggy, just in keeping an eye on time, is there anything else that you'd like to add from the book that we haven't sort of covered that you'd like to kind of point out?
The closing thought I'd like to end on, Adrian, is scaling up excellence begins with each one of us.
Right.
You can't wait for the boss to do it. Yeah. You actually can't wait for somebody else's initiative. You actually have to do it. And you have to do it in the simplest of ways. You want to scale excellence, do it, by the way you reshape your workspace, for instance, the way you relate to customers or the way you relate to your employees. The other closing thought I want to leave all listeners with is, in all the excellent organizations that we visited and spoke to and studied, mm-hmm. we found a relentless restlessness.
Right.
So they always see the glass as half empty. They're never complacent. They're never self-congratulatory saying, hey, we're excellent. They're always saying, we got to do better. And that's really what makes excellent organizations excellent.
Fantastic. Huggy, that's been amazing. I mean, I have one question left, and it's a question I always finish these podcast interviews on, and that is there anything that you'd like to shamelessly plug?
I think read our book, Scaling Up Excellence. But most importantly, this book is done well. It was in the Wall Street Journal business bestseller list, and it's all nice. But the thing that's very heartening to us is people who read the book, they actually write their stories and get back to us. One person who bought the book wrote back to us and said, I wish I'd read the book earlier. I would have then accepted a leadership position had I read through the book. This was actually a person who was being considered for the role of a CEO. At the other extreme, we had a young lady in rural Georgia in the United States who actually read through the book and said, my God, we've got to scale up excellence in schools. And she's created a study group of 5 people and they're doing things. So what Bob and I want people to do is read the book, but most importantly, when you read the book, don't hesitate to share with us your scaling adventures.
Huggy, that's been brilliant. I mean, I just want to say congratulations on the book and congratulations on the research. Thank you for your time today. I mean, that's it. I've really enjoyed having a chat with you.
Likewise, Adrian, thank you for the time and for the delightful conversation.